Welcome back to my channel, and today is lens review day, and I have a very special lens here still in the package in front of me, and I'm really looking forward to try this lens out. The manufacturer is Laowa, and I know this brand from several lenses I tested in the past. Typically they are premium build quality, they have very good image quality, and they come at an affordable price tag. This one here is priced at $1,200, so is probably priced at the higher end for a brand like Laowa. But if it keeps the promise, being a dreamer, I think it will be well spent money. We are talking here about an ultra wide lens with 15mm focal length, so this gives you a very wide field of view. Widest open aperture is f4.5, so your options to play with a shallow depth of field are rather limited here, and I will come to more specs in a moment. But the most important feature is hidden here, and that's that little knob. Because this is not only an ultra-wide lens, it's an ultra-wide shift lens. So it's basically made for architectural shots, but also for landscape. It's excellent, supposed to be excellent, because we have to test this out first, for panorama stitchings, and in this way creating huge resolution images. And it actually has headroom in both directions by 11mm. So we come to that all in a moment, and now let's kick off the video. Before quickly unboxing the lens, let's quickly discuss for which camera systems you can actually purchase this lens. And for this, let's turn it around. And this one here is built for the Sony FE mount. And I'm going to shoot this lens on my Sony a7R Mark IV, which means we are going to shoot that lens with 61 megapixels, so very high resolution, which will put the lens to test immediately if the glass is good enough for a resolution as high as the one we get in the Sony a7R Mark IV. Besides the Sony FE mount, the lens is available also for Leica L mount, for Nikon F and Nikon C, for Canon EF and Canon RF, and for various Pentax mounts. So this lens actually is available for a lot of camera systems, so no matter what kind of shooter you are, you can very likely have this lens mounted on your camera system. And then there are also, of course, various adapters which you can use to fit this lens to the camera of your choice. Let's now unbox the lens and let's see what we get in the package here. And looking at that package, my first impression is that this is a premium packaging. And this is actually good. And we see this more and more with Chinese manufacturers on their smartphones, which they ship to Europe and to all kinds of other regions. We see it in their lens systems, and they find premium packages for these lenses, despite the fact that if you would get a similar value package from, let's say, Leica or, maybe Nikon or Sony, you would probably pay a much higher price. And looking at that box, here you have again the company brand Laowa. Here you have again what's inside the package. And here you have a Like Us on Facebook sticker. So all quite nice. You get here some rainbow colors, whatever that is supposed to indicate. Looking into it, the I would say premium look and feel fades out a little bit, and that's something I've seen before on Laowa lenses. They actually do not have a lens pouch here in leather or some fabric. They just have it in a plain vanilla plastic bag, and that's of course not premium, but it's the way it is, and I couldn't care less about it. So let's open this up here and let's get the lens outside, and here we go. I will come to the build quality in a moment, of course, but just from a first impression, that lens is an impressive piece of technology. And I like it a lot in the way I see it and have it in my hands. In the package itself, we only find some paperwork here, and there is some checks and balances here. I think that's also a serial number and what have you. And then there's a little brochure about the lens, and that's typically in its first part in Chinese. And then at a later part, you also get it in English, which is helpful for me. And you get a little bit about the elements on the lens and all of that. What I want to have a look at is, here we go, that's the spec sheet. And let's have a quick look at the spec sheet now. So first of all, this lens has been calculated for full frame. So it will fit all kinds of full frame cameras, as pointed out before when we talked about the mount. 15mm focal length was already mentioned before. And then the angle of view is 110 degrees, so really ultra wide. And what's also interesting, and actually a nice feature, is the maximum image circle diameter here, which is 65 millimeters. And Laowa claims that with adapters you can use this lens on the Fuji GFX medium format system, and vignetting will not kick in before you reach the 8mm shift, and that is really impressive. And then they say that light vignetting will kick in from 9 to 11mm, which can be easily corrected in post. Maximum aperture, not really wide open as I said at the beginning, 4.5, and then minimum aperture when you stop down is f22. The optical construction, 17 elements in 11 groups, that's quite impressive. So this is a really complex construction here. And what impresses me most here is the 20 centimeter minimum shooting distance. That means you can get really, really close to your subject and in this way create nice effects and nice image compositions, of course. Then the weight is 600 grams, and here you find again all the mount systems for which this lens is built. And all in, I think, a quite impressive and very interesting, of course, spec sheet we get here for the Laowa lens. Let's clean up the table and let's have a closer look at the lens, and also, of course, mount it on the Sony A7R Mark IV. So I think we should get this all diligently stored here. Let's get this away. And let's mount the lens directly to the Sony A7R Mark IV. So first of all, let's remove the body cap, and if we look here, let's start to have a look at the lens. First of all, there is no rubber sealing here, at least I don't feel it, so you have to be careful with that lens in rain, splash water, dust. What I very often do, and also did in the past in shootings in Africa, I was finding for myself a rubber ring which has a fitting diameter to the diameter of the lens, and then putting it on top as soon as the lens is mounted. That at least helps a little bit to protect the camera body if the lens has no rubber sealing by itself. The next observation when looking at the lens mount is that there are no electronic contacts here. So there is no information channeled or passed through from the settings on the lens into the camera body and then ending up in the metadata of your image. There is absolutely no information transported. So whatever settings you have to remember them yourself. You will not find them in the metadata. On the lens, we find that red dot indicating where it fits the camera mount. And here we have the white dot, I think, on the Sony. So this should fit exactly here, and then rotating it. Let's see if it clicks in the way I love it. Yeah, very good. Sounds solid. And if we look at that combo here, it looks quite nice. It's actually, from an optical perspective, a very nice combination of a high quality lens with a high quality camera. Now let's have a closer look at the lens. And first of all, if you look at the lens cap here, this is a full metal construction. It's very nice, and the same applies to the whole lens. Everything here is metal, and the build quality of that lens is beyond any doubt. It's really a high premium, high quality build, and the premium lens you have in your hands. If you remove the lens cap, there is always a click, which I also like a lot. So I'm trying to demonstrate this now. So loosening it, clicking in. Quite nice. So I think here also we see the premium build quality. Removing it now, you see that based on the ultra wide construction of the lens, the glass is actually coming out of the lens tube. So normal filters will not fit here, but there are filter systems which you can mount on these type of lenses, which will help you to use filters if you need them. But in general, normal filters will not work. Now on the lens itself, you find all kinds of elements here. And the first one to mention is the focus ring. And it starts at the minimum focusing distance of 20 centimeters. And then it travels all the way up to infinity. And the way you have to go to get to infinity is quite long in terms of rotation here. So you see this, there is a lot to turn if you cover the whole spectrum from 20 centimeters up to infinity. And that's actually very good, because if, like here, you are in a fully manual focusing situation, you want to have actually fine adjustments of your focus ring to make sure you can adjust the focus by means of focus peaking in a way that you really nail the focus and it sits where it's supposed to sit. The next ring here is the aperture ring. And that starts, as mentioned before, at widest open f4.5. And then you can stop this down all the way to f22. And also here you find some clicks, and they are hard to hear. I will push up the volume to hopefully get this recognized, but let's try here. It's buttery smooth. And these clicks at the f-stops here, they help you to find your aperture even in total darkness. I think that's very helpful, and again confirms on both rings, the focus ring, which is absolutely silent, absolutely no noise here, as well as on the aperture ring with these very low profile clicks, but solid clicks which you find in darkness, confirms actually the high build quality of the lens. Now let's have a look at the main function of the lens, which is its shift capability. And there are 4 elements which are important for shifting. The first is a shift ring. And that shift ring currently is locked, which brings me to the second element. That's that knob here, which says lock. If this one is locked, the shift ring cannot be turned. So no matter what setting you have in terms of shift, if you lock it in, it stays locked and nothing can accidentally move. So we have first element is the ring, second element is the lock, third element is the scale here on the flip side of the lens at this point in time. I come back to this in a moment. And then the fourth element for shifting is that rotation scale in terms of degrees. And there is another little switch here. If you push this down, you can rotate the lens, and you are now at 0 degrees, and every dash here corresponds to 15 degrees. So here we can go 15, 30, 45 degrees. Of course, the most common application will be 90 degrees, which is just here. And now we have basically transformed this from a vertical shift lens into a horizontal shift lens, for instance, for panorama stitching. So these 4 elements, they all together represent the shift capability of the lens. And we are going to try this out now quickly and play a little bit with it before we go outside and do some real life shooting. So first of all, let's make sure that we unlock the shift ring. So this is done by rotating that knob here. Then we have here the scale. And on that scale, you see that's currently adjusted at 0. And now we can shift this by rotating this ring, and in this way going up to 11 millimeters in both directions. And in this way we can shift in a vertical direction, which is in particular good in architecture, for instance, for correcting on the mechanics of the lens, falling lines if you have tall buildings. Now, if we want to rotate that, I can push the button here and then rotate it by 90 degrees. And then the scale is now on top of the lens. And again, I can now shift into the horizontal direction, again by 11 millimeters in both directions. And as I said before, the image circle with 65 millimeters is so large that you will see no vignetting. At least that's what Laowa is claiming on full frame sensors, and only mild vignetting from 8 millimeters on medium format sensors like you find them on the Fuji GFX. So all in quite nice, very versatile, and a carefully thought through construction. Now let's go outside and let's do some test shooting. And there are a few things I want to carefully check. First of all, shooting a lens on a 61 megapixel sensor is quite a challenge. And will this glass be able to provide that level of clarity and detail we expect from a Sony a7R Mark IV? Let's find out. Second point, I want to check how the distortion of the lens is. And typically ultra wide lenses tend to exhibit significant distortion. You can correct this later in post, no problem, but if natively it comes out without distortion, that's even better. And Laowa in their marketing for the lens actually claim that this lens has 0 distortion. Again, let's go out, shoot the lens and find out. Third, given what Laowa says about that lens in terms of vignetting, I would not expect any vignetting on a full frame sensor. So let's see if the promise is kept and if this lens has no vignetting, no matter whether we shift by 11 millimeters in one or the other direction. And then fourth, of course, I'm interested in the handling of the lens. How much do I like it to work with that lens in shift situations? And also here, I clearly will share my experience and thoughts in the course of the video. And now let's go outside and let's get some test shooting done. For testing the lens, I first wanted to go for some of the modern office and industrial buildings in Zurich. But then I decided to go to the city of Zug, which in the old part of the town has lots of crooked alleys, crooked houses. It's a little bit like in Harry Potter if you go to Diagon Alley. And that clearly provides a very good challenge for an architectural lens like this Laowa shift lens here. In order to provide some impressions how it is shooting in Zug, I quickly share some video footage before we look into the sample images. I will now go through various sample images and of course share that footage here. You see there are lots of images I took on that day, and I will pay particular attention to sharpness as mentioned before, also distortion, all kinds of other aspects. So let's kick this off. In order to provide some impression how ultra wide 15mm really are, have a look how I'm filming here with my iPhone and have to significantly move up the phone to get the house in front of me in scene, whereas in the live view of the camera you see that the house is already fully in scene. So let's have a look at distortion first, and here is kind of a pavilion which I used for that test, and if I look at the image here it looks quite nice. I actually noticed throughout all the images there is a little bit of distortion, but it's hardly recognizable and you can easily correct this in post. And actually, if you look into the Laowa spec sheet, they say on the headline 0 distortion, but then later in the floating text they say almost no distortion, which is a little bit discounting the headline, of course. But in general, when it comes to distortion, the lens behaves very well. It's also very sharp. We are going to see this over and over again in the sample images. I want to demonstrate this by some other images, but here, this one was in particular made for looking into distortion. So here with this image here, we have the classical situation where a shift lens with a vertical shift here, of course, comes into play. And if you have a wide angle 15mm lens, then you always get a lot of foreground. And that is something you can play with and can leverage for your advantage in the image composition, of course. And I think the classical theory on wide angle lenses is get something interesting in the foreground and play with it. But here, nothing interesting is in the foreground. It's just an empty street. And that's why I decided to shift the lens in the vertical direction. And then if you compare the frames, it looks of course much more interesting and much better because you don't cut off the houses and you actually have this nice ensemble of 4 houses in a row in the frame. And the second point I wanted to make here is that the lens is super sharp. It's super sharp at the center. As you can see here, this is really crisp, is carrying over the full resolution of the A7 Mark IV sensor with its 60-61 megapixel, but also if you go to the far corners here, for instance here, it's not losing any sharpness, and that's typical for good lenses with a large image circle because they are supposed to be even shot on medium format like the Fuji GFX, and that's why they need to have a bit more in terms of reserves when it comes to the corners. And no matter where you look in the image, it's everywhere super crisp and super sharp. Now I have no record here about my aperture, but I was shooting the lens all the time between f5.6 and f11. So clearly this is here already stopped down, and that's why we have that wide depth of field here in terms of sharpness. But really good if you look at that, absolutely sharp, absolutely nothing to complain. Here is another typical scene which would be kind of impossible to capture without an ultra wide shift lens as we have it here. So here is the scene showing that theater on the opposite side of the street, and again we get here a lot of boring foreground by means of that street, and clearly that's not what I want to have. So I shifted the lens, which immediately gives a totally different appearing image composition. Clearly if the sky would have had some structure on this day, it would be even much nicer, but everything was gray and gray in terms of weather conditions on that day. But I think it proves the concept, and again you see here when I crop in how sharp this image is. This is really a lot of detail, a lot of clarity. It's a very nice image, and clearly in post you could also do something more interesting with the background if you wanted. But that's the image I want, that's the image I don't want, because the foreground is empty, and that's not what you should do with a wide angle lens. So shifting it vertically is exactly the right thing to do. Later on I crossed the street and went a little bit closer, as you can see here, and then this becomes even, I think, a nice architectural image here, what we see here. And again, looking into this, you see how sharp this is. It's still loading here, by the way. Let's wait for a second. So now the preview is fully loaded, and you see on the letters on the wall here how sharp and crisp that image is, and it's actually as sharp in every different place of the image as it is in all other places. You see everything, the structure of the wall here, quite nice. And again, an architectural lens is something fantastic. I love it. I have it on my Phase 1 and the XT body. I have it in shift lenses from Canon and Nikon. I have it now from Laowa, coming for all kinds of different camera mounts. And I think this is really, really nice what you get and what you can do with these kind of architectural lenses. When I introduced the lens, I spoke about a minimum shooting distance of 20 centimeters. And the question is, can you do something with it? And if you get that close to your subject, will you get some blurriness in the background? And the answer is yes. And here is an image I took for that purpose. And here you actually get some background blurriness now. The lens was no widest open at f4.5. And what again did blow me away was the level of sharpness. If you zoom into that image to these leaves, you get all the tiny little details, and you see here how you can zoom this in, crop it in, and almost get a macro-like appearance. And given that the resolution of this Sony A7R Mark IV sensor, but also on all the other cameras this lens is built for, is very high, you actually can crop in and get almost macro type pictures here, or close-ups if you really wanted to do that. And the background blurriness is also pleasant. You see the structure, you see what's going on, you see that you have the street and the buildings in the background, but you also get a little bit of a three-dimensional pop, clearly with a widest open aperture of f4.5. Playing a lot with a shallow depth of field is not what this lens has been built for, and that's why you need to live with that aperture of f4.5. I will now share a few more sample images in a very quick slideshow, and then I want to conclude the video with a few practical hints and remarks how to best possible shoot that lens. So let's kick off with some images here, in particular from inside a church, which I personally like a lot, and again where the shift capability of the lens fully paid back. I truly enjoyed shooting that Laowa shift lens on my Sony A7R Mark IV. And at the end of the video, I want to do a few remarks concerning my shooting experience. And first of all, in architecture, you typically want to have a wide depth of field. So I was shooting most of the time with an f8. And shooting with an f8 means that everything is in focus if you adjust your focus ring at infinity. And you also get a super wide depth of field, so you can rely on the focus and you don't have to take care of focus any longer, which frees up capacity for the shift ring. So what I did is I unlocked this knob here, and then I operated with my fingers or my hand that shift ring here. So I could keep my eye on the electronic viewfinder and conveniently operate the shift mechanism up and down in vertical direction, and in this way get my image composition in the way I want to have it. And that turned out to be very, very convenient. And also I think the images you just saw are very convincing regarding the quality of that lens shot on this 61 megapixel sensor in the Sony A7R Mark IV. I hope you liked that video. If you liked it, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up for your appreciation of my work. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned on my channel. There's always more to come. Stay safe and healthy, and of course, peace out.